Hey everyone, and welcome to the next video in my Hapi tutorial series. We're here, I'm going to be talking about cookies. So before I start this video, I want to talk about what cookies are. Cookies, or more formally known as HTTP cookies, are essentially text files with data used to identify a user. Each cookie a user receives comes from a specific website and is stored on their computer while they browse the web. Cookies can be used to keep track of your browsing activity, to give you specialized information such as tailored ads, but cookies can also be used to remember your login details for a specific website. So when you close out a website whose server has set a cookie on your browser and then open it again, you are still logged in. This is the functionality of cookies that we are particularly interested in this video. However, to receive the cookie, you of course have to be authenticated first, and this is from signing in with the correct credentials. If you are successfully authenticated, then the browser receives a reply from the server with a session cookie. To implement cookie authentication into our Hapi application, we need to use the plugin @hapi-cookie. And this is a plugin that will store a cookie in the user's browser once they are authenticated. And as I said earlier, this gives you the option of keeping the user logged in even after they leave your site. So to get started, the first thing we need to do is install the plugin by doing npm install @hapi-cookie. So I'm going to exit out of NodeMon real quick, just do npm install @hapi-cookie. And then let's import it into our project. So we're going to do, I'm just going to call it, or in fact, let's just register it with our server with the await keyword, or await server.register. So if I can remember where we were doing all this, is right here. Under, let's get rid of Hapi basic actually, because we're not going to be using that. Instead, we're going to be using @hapi-cookie, like this. And let's actually remove the rest of the basic stuff that we did earlier. So right here we have our strategy, login, and basic. We set the default for every route to be the basic authentication. I don't think we have it anywhere else. And then just at the top is where we actually created the validate function if you watched the previous video. So we're not going to be using that because we're going to be using cookies instead of basic authentication. So let's just save this. And then let's just check or make sure our website is working correctly. So it's nodemon server.js. It's running on the port. Let's do awesome. So it looks like we're good to go. So if you remember from the last video, we're going to create our own strategy from the cookie scheme. And we can do this by using the server.auth.strategy method, just like we did with basic authentication. So let's go into here and let's scroll down a bit. And then right before our views, I'm going to do server.auth.strategy. And so this is what we're going to create our strategy from the cookie scheme. And so if you remember, this function takes 3 parameters: a name for the strategy, which can be whatever you want to call it, and you will reference this name later when you actually implement the strategy. So let's just call this one, login. And then the next parameter is the scheme that we are using, which in this case is the cookie scheme. So if you remember in the previous video, it was basic, but now we're creating a strategy from the cookie scheme. And then finally, it takes an options object, which differs depending on the type of scheme that is being used. And these options are used basically to customize our strategy. So let's just pass in an object here, an empty object right now, and leave it like this. So as I said here, these options that we pass in to auth strategy differ depending on the scheme we are using. And when we are configuring options for the cookie scheme, or making a strategy from the cookie scheme, the first thing we need to do is specify a cookie object. And then we can add a few properties to this object. So let me show you what this would look like. So we'll do cookie like this, and then make its value another object. And the first is the name of the cookie. And you can see this name actually in the Google DevTools when it is set. I'll show you this later on the video, but for now, just type in name, and then whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it session. I believe that's the same as in the Hapi docs. And then next is the password to encrypt the cookie. So you want your cookie, or the values, of course, in the cookie to be encrypted. And so this is a requirement for the Hapi cookie plugin. So we're going to do password. And then the only requirement for this is it has to be at least 32 characters long. So I'm going to do soccer. It can be, of course, whatever you want it to be. And then I'm just going to paste it a few times to make it at least 32 characters. And then finally, what we need to do is set the key is secure to false. And what this does is allow us to work in HTTP. By default, this is true, so we need to change it to false so we can work in HTTP on our local host. And this key is secure. And so we'll set that equal to false. And now let's add a few more keys outside of this cookie object. So I'm going to make a comma here. And the first is going to be redirect to. And this tells the server where to redirect the user if an unauthenticated user tries to access a resource that requires authentication. For example, say you're trying to access your feed on Facebook, but you weren't signed in, you would just be redirected to the login page. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to make the key redirect to, and if the user isn't authenticated, we're going to redirect them to the login page, just like this. And now the final property we're going to work with is called validate func. So it'll be validate function, which is short for that, right here. And then this function validates that a cookie is still valid. For example, say the user authenticates themselves successfully by logging in, they receive a cookie from the server, and then they leave the site, and once they return, the validate function will check if their current cookie is still valid. In other words, subsequent requests containing the session cookie are authenticated and validated with this function that we're going to pass in here. And the parameters this function takes are the Hapi request object of the request that is going to be authenticated and the session object that we create if the user has successfully logged in. So we'll find out more about this function later, but for now, let's just do the signature, which is asynchronous. Then we do request, the Hapi request object, and then session, which contains information that we set later. But for now, let's just leave this as and save it. We'll fill this out later, but let's work on with some other stuff first. And now also, if you can remember from our previous video when we went over the basic scheme, we have set up our strategy, but we need to actually register it with every route or specific routes. And what you want to do with the cookie authentication is we're going to register on every route, as we want every route to require a cookie with the correct credentials to actually be viewed. So to do this, we once again use server.auth.default, and then we pass in the name of our strategy, which for us, if you can remember, is login, because that's the name that we gave right here. So make sure that matches what we pass in here. And then let's just save this. And now, a file that I made a bit back in the series is in here, and it is called loggedin.html. And you can see this shows you are logged in, welcome with code. Let's just change this to you are logged in, welcome, like this. And then what we're going to do is in our server is if the user has successfully logged in, then we're going to show them that file. So we will show them loggedin.html if they have logged in with the correct credentials. And then also if they close the browser and come back in and they still have a cookie set with the correct credentials, then we will also display this page again instead of showing them to the login page. But for now, let's go to our login page and see what happens. So in our server, let me just restart this just in case, but I'll do nodemon server.js. So if we load this up, let's go to this page here, click refresh. You can see that we have an error saying you have been redirected too many times. And this is because if you can remember back in here, what we set was that every single path requires a cookie to be logged in. But we haven't actually had the chance to log in yet, so of course we don't have a cookie set. And that's why we're being redirected, because if you can remember, we set redirect to here to -login. And because also -login has, you don't have a cookie set, it'll keep redirecting you, so you'll just be redirected indefinitely. And the way around this is to add the following. So into our page here, so the main route that we go to, let's add the following. Options, and then we want to specify is the key auth, and then the key mode, this out of the way, the mode to be try. And by default with cookie authentication, or with the cookie scheme, the default mode is require. But we can choose a few pages that we want the user to be able to access without a cookie set. And of course, the login page or the main page is one of those pages. So now let's go back. Let's refresh this again. Actually, we're still on login. Let's just go to the main page. You can see now we can get here successfully. Whereas if I went back and say got rid of this, saved again, let's go back in, refresh. You can see once again we have been redirected too many times. So let's go back in, press Ctrl-Z on Windows, and save it again. And let's just show you one more time. Right here, we are working successfully. And now, so what I want to show you is this page here, of course, is coming from the inert plugin that we made, and it's returning the file welcome.html. So if we look into this file, just giving you a quick recap, you can see we have a form, and that corresponds to this form here. And what it does when the user submits these values, we can access them, you remember, through our request.payload in our Hapi route, but the action or where it is getting sent to is -login, and the method, of course, is post. And so if we go in here and we look for -login, we have -login, post, in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this stuff, and we're going to work with this fresh. So this is the route that will validate the provided username and password. We'll just use the same login page. So we're going to be using the same login page, of course, that we used in the earlier videos. And what we're going to do on this route is just check if the username is equal to Whitcode and the password is equal to subscribe. So we're just going to hard code these. So we're going to do request.payload.username. And if you remember, that is obtained because the name for this input here is username. And we access it, if it's through the post method, by the request.payload. So if that is equal to Whitcode, like this, and then also, and the request.payload.password is equal to subscribe, then what we are going to do is we can send back a cookie to the user that contains the login information. And this is done by using the request.cookieAuth.set method and then passing the object with the information that we want the cookie to have. And this is the kind of information we could pass that could have information such as if the user likes sports or not. Like you could pass something like, so it's request.cookieAuth.set. And it takes an object, and say we had a key like likes sports, and then we set that equal to true. Well, what we could do with that is we could send advertisements revolving around sports, but that's just like a hint of what we're doing. But what I really want to do with this, of course, is we're working with login information. And so what we specifically want to do is we want to set just the request.payload.username, and then we want to set the password to request.payload.password. And this object that we have passed becomes the session parameter in the validate function option that we have for our cookie strategy. So this right here, the object we pass into set, becomes, if you scroll up here, this session object here, which you remember is what we passed in as an option for our cookie, or for the scheme that strategy that we're making off of the cookie scheme. And so then what we want to do back down here is, if these were the correct credentials, we want to set the username and password. And then what we also want to do is we want to redirect the user to a welcome route. So if they signed in successfully, we'll set a cookie on them that contains the stuff we want. We just want the username and password, and then we'll redirect them to -welcome, which you can see is this corresponds to this route here. And we have h1 welcome to whatever. But what we're going to do here is we're going to use inert, and we're going to do, I think it's h.file, and then the path of the string, or the path to the file, I believe is just .-static and then logged-in.html. So we'll do .-static-logged-in.html. But also, actually what we did is we set a default location for all our static content. So if we scroll up here with inert, we set the files all relative to static. So what we actually have to do, if you watched my other tutorial on inert, is we don't even have to say static. We just have to say logged-in.html. So now what will happen is, if the user supplies these right information, we'll set a cookie on them, or the server will respond with a cookie to the set, which will be set on their browser, and then it will redirect them to the welcome page. And if not, so say the credentials were incorrect, we're just going to do h.redirect back to that login page. So we've saved this. Let's see what happens. So let's go in here. First thing we should do is, let's just get this wrong. Let's say just admin and soccer, and press login, see what happens. You can see once again that we were actually redirected too many times. And that is because, once again, remember the default mode is require. And even though this is a post route, so this right here is a post route, we still have to have permission to access it. So let's do options, and what we want to do is auth, and what we want to set is the mode to try, like this. So now let's go back in here. Let's refresh this to the home page. Let's do it again. Let's do admin, soccer. So of course these are the wrong credentials. And we got logged in here, -login, an internal server error. Let's see what that is. And so of course the issue with this is that we were just doing h.redirect, but I forgot that in every Hapi route, you have to return something. So we were returning h.redirect. So let's reload this, go back in. Let's go back to our home page here. Admin, soccer, and let's log in. And you can see we got redirected. Now let's do the correct credentials. Let's do WIT code, and then I believe it was subscribe. And now let's type this in. Another internal error. Let's go welcome. It's probably the same thing. But this time the error is because we need to work with our validate function. So let's go in and start working with that. So with this function, if you can remember, let's scroll up to it right here. If you can remember, the session parameter here is the object that we pass to request.cookieAuth.set. So when we look down here to cookieAuth.set, we see we have username and things like that. So let's scroll back up here. And so we can use the properties in here to check if the request is valid. I'm just showing it this way. Usually you could do a different thing, like you check if the user exists, or you check by a specific ID. But just for tutorial sake or just for teaching, I'm just going to show you how it works. So what we are going to do is we're just going to check if the username is equal to WIT code and the password is still equal to subscribe. And if those are true, then we return the key valid. So what this function here has to do is it has to return the key valid, similar to how that one option for the basic strategy had to return is valid. So let's do here session.username, if that is equal to WIT code, and then session.password is equal to subscribe, like this. Then what we want to do is we're just going to return the key valid, and we're going to set it equal to true, like this. And on the other hand, if that isn't the case, then we return valid to be false, like that. And so that basically what this says is when the user goes to a page and it's looking for their cookie information, it'll check if the username is WIT code and the password is subscribe in the current session. And if it is, then it'll return valid as true and it'll allow the user to see the page. And if not, they will be rejected and from seeing the content in the page. So let's save this. And now let's go back into our server, refresh, and let's do it again. Let's do WIT code, subscribe. And now you can see we get you are logged in, welcome. So what I want to show you now is actually the cookie information. So if I press Control-Shift-J and we go to application, you can actually see the cookie here, session. And what that corresponds to is the name here that we gave it session. So if we changed it to like soccer, for example, and then let's rerun this. Let's go to the main page. And if we do WIT code and subscribe like this and press login, now if we do Control-Shift-J again, you can see we have another cookie that is called soccer. So this is just where you can actually see the cookies that are being set on you. And of course the value is encrypted, so this doesn't mean much, but this is just interesting. You can see where the name actually appears. But anyway, for now, let's go back into our code. And now I'm going to show you how to clear a cookie. So what we should do for this is let's just make a logout route and then clear the cookie. And we could do this by making a logout route, and when the user visits it, we will clear the cookie and we will redirect them to the home page. So I'm not sure if we already have a log. We have a logout basic. We have a logout route right here. And the way to clear a cookie is you use request.cookieAuth and then just .clear like this. So that'll clear the cookie from the browser. So if I even went back to the dev tools here, the name of the cookie would be gone if we went there. And then what we want to do after that is redirect them to the home page, which I believe we are already doing. So now let's run this again. I believe we should be good to go. Yeah, automatically refreshed. Let's go to dash logout like that. So it's redirected as here. Let's go back into our dev tools, and you can see that the cookie is gone. So the cookie that we named soccer. So if I go back, where do we call it? Soccer, you can see in here that it is no longer there. And that is because we cleared the cookie and then redirected the user. Now another thing I think we should do is, remember we have this route that we made at the very beginning of this series that if you get any route wrong, then it'll tell you you must be lost. We want this 404 error to also not require a cookie. So I just do auth this and then mode try. So if you get the route wrong, for example, instead of being rejected from it and redirected, it'll just say, oh no, you must be lost. That's just another thing I like to do. And then another thing we can do is let's customize this. So what we did is for the welcome, we said, we returned this file. Let's just return a custom message. So you can access the credentials from the cookie by using right here, request.auth.credentials, and then .username, which will be the stuff that we set in here. So you can see we set username. So we can say hello. We can return hello like this if they have signed in successfully. So this should say hello WIT-code. So let's go back in here and let's log in with our usual credentials. So WIT-code, subscribe, log in. You can see we get hello WIT-code, which corresponds to the username that we set with the cookie right here, username.payload or request.payload.username. So we access, like I said, our credentials, so request.auth.credentials, and then the key that we specify into set. However, what we can also do is we can return credentials in our validate function up here. So we return valid is true, and then along with that, we can return another key called credentials, and this can be the object or anything that we also want to use. So let's say we can make a key favorite food, and let's do pizza, like this. Then when we resave, we should still be logged in because we have a cookie set. So let's go back into here. Let's refresh. Hello undefined. And so you can see it says hello undefined. And what I wanted to show you with this is because if we explicitly set our credentials in this function here, so if we set these here, these will override the credentials that we have in our session or the ones that we set here with the cookie. So these no longer exist, and that's why we're getting undefined. So you can see now, if I remove this again, let's just blank this out, save, and then if we go back, our cookie is still set. We get hello WIT-code. Now let's go in here and let's add credentials again, but let's change our, I think it's going off username. Let's set username something like, I don't know, let's just do soccer, and then it'll say hello soccer. So click on this, hello soccer. So that's why it will override if you specify credentials here with the returned in the valid key or the validate function. It will overwrite these here. So just keep that in mind. And now another thing is this kind of defeats the point of our application, how we can still go to the home page here because we have a cookie set. We're already logged in, and so why would we need to be shown this web page here? And so the way to do this is our route, our main route. Where is it? Right here. So what we can do here is there is a cool little thing you can do with the request object where request.auth, and then I believe it's .is authenticated. And what this means is if we're already authenticated, and if we have a cookie set that follows this, so our username is WIT-code and our password is subscribe, then we don't even have to sign in. So we shouldn't even be shown this page. So what we should do is we could do like if request.auth is authenticated, then we can return, or no, yeah. If we are authenticated, let's do a redirect. So let's return spell that wrong, h.redirect, and where we want to redirect to is, what was that page? The welcome. So if they already are authenticated, so if they already have a cookie set, we will redirect to -welcome. And on the other hand, what we will do is if we are not authenticated, then we will just keep this the same way and just return the welcome page. So now let's try this again. So let's go here, let's refresh. You can see we're already authenticated, so it takes us here. So say we try to go back to the login page. We can't. We just get redirected here because we're already logged in. And now what I also want to show you is right now we haven't set a time to live on our cookie. What we have is when the browser closes, our cookie will expire. So like right now, let's say we open a tab. Let's go to Google. Let's just type soccer in on Google. And then we close this tab. If we go back to our local host, you can see we still get logged in because the cookie is still there because it hasn't expired. But if we close out of this browser completely, so we did that, and now let's go back in. Let's go back to localhost. You can see we're not logged in anymore because we didn't get redirected to -welcome. If we try to go to -welcome, you can see we just get sent back here because we don't have a cookie set. So what we should do is we should also make it so that our cookie persists if the browser closes. And we can do that by setting the option, I believe it is time to live. And so time to live, or TTL, is basically how long until our cookie expires. And this goes within the, of course, when we're setting up our strategy from the cookie scheme, but this goes within this cookie object here. And the key is just TTL like this, then you specify in milliseconds how long until the cookie expires. And so, for example, I don't know the exact thing, but let's do like, say, how many milliseconds in one day? Well, there's a lot. So let's just do, let's just add a big amount of milliseconds. So I don't know, let's just do 30,000. I think that's what, 30 seconds or something. But let's just do 30,000. So now it should not end when we log in or when we close the browser. So let's log in again. The usual credentials. Looks good. And now let's close out of the browser. And now let's open it up again. And you can see we're logged in still. And whereas in the other instance, when we didn't specify this key right here, it just ended because we didn't explicitly set a timer, and by default, the time to live will just be one browser session, or when the browser is closed. So this is my video on Hapi cookie authentication. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll get back to you. And I'm looking forward to continuing this series. I think the next video I'm going to probably do on pre-route handlers, so be on the lookout for that. But besides that, thanks for watching.